Okay, everybody, I think we're going to get started. My name is Tracy McIntyre. I'm the Director of Communications for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, Maryland. And I'm here with my colleague, Rachel. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Rachel Moses. I am the Pry House site manager and retail manager and also helping collections. So kind of jack of all trades.
All right. And we welcome you to the third meeting of the Between the Lines Book Club. And today we are going to be discussing two separate books. We chose two because they're relatively short. The first one is Hospital Sketches by Louisa-May Alcott. And the second one is Reminiscences of My Life in Camp by Susie King Taylor. We're going to get started with Louisa-May Alcott's Hospital Sketches. I have to say right off, she's a favorite of mine because I was born in Concord, Massachusetts, where she is from. And I grew up visiting her home often and just thoroughly loving her entire life story. And Hospital Sketches is an aspect of her life, I think, that some people aren't aware of. They're mostly aware of her for writing Little Women. But in fact, she was a Civil War nurse. So let's get started on the discussion. Do we have anybody that has some comments to start? Did everybody read it?
Yes.
Yes. This is Cindy. I don't have a camera tonight because I have an issue with the software. So I'm here, can't see me, but
Okay, welcome, Cindy.
I really enjoyed reading the book because it reminded me a lot the way she wrote of Little Women. Mm-hmm. And to be able to get that background information and how she observed what was going on and what she wrote about it, I thought was pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I think her style really comes across, her writing style. I like the fact that she injected some humor into the situation. There were some really sort of heart-rending scenes that she describes, but then there's also, she would inject some humor. She talks about her lodgings and the poor iron bedstead and the pillow in the last stages of consumption, which I thought was pretty funny.
I agree. I enjoyed that humor too.
I thought it was funny when she was talking about after she signed up, when she was trying to get her pass to get to DC, just the rigmarole she had to go through to get that, and how at one point she says, well, I'm a feminist, but at this point I will gladly be the timid woman if somebody can get me a pass.
Exactly. Yes.
and I'm sure it was like that for.
Yeah. And I could picture in my head the way she was describing it. She was like wandering all around the State House in Boston. And I've been in the State House in Boston and I could picture the halls of the State House and just how expansive they are. And you can get totally lost in a second. And I just felt for this poor woman. You know, she wants this stupid railroad pass.
That hopefully she won't have to pay for herself, although she would have.
Exactly. But yeah, I really enjoyed the descriptions and I think it also kind of brings home exactly what these nurses had to go through versus, I mean, you know in your head a little bit about, okay, they had to care for the sick guys and they had to change the bandages and all of that, but there's one point in there where she has to tell a soldier that he's dying. Yes. And you would think that would be the doctor's responsibility, but he puts it on her. She has to tell him. And it's really heartrending.
I find that she's very sarcastic about things, which I like, especially when she's comparing, well, you know, that men take so much longer to do something than and I'm also a really big fan of hers. But you keep seeing that because I reread this. I mean, I've read this so many times, but rereading it with a fresh look, you know, it shows how she thinks really comes through. And apparently it was originally based on the letters that she had written home.
Yes.
The book was based on.
Yeah, and you notice she uses an alias in the book. She
Periwinkle.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I got a kick out of the names, the aliases that she assigned to the other people, the funny names that she gave other people.
I wanted to comment about this when you were saying about the men, about washing the men. I mean, it's kind of like, this is the time when, nobody really sees anybody with a little bit of clothes on. And because I thought during the Civil War, they tried to make wanted women who were widows. At least I think that's what Dorothea Dix was looking for in the way of nurses, so that they could take care of men. But, normally, maybe your brother or your father, but women wouldn't be exposed to, a male without clothes on.
Yeah, I don't think it was strictly just widows. I believe it was if you were from a good family, and you had good references and such, then you could be and you were plain looking.
Yeah,
yeah. They didn't want like Scarlett O'Hara walking in there and I'll let it tend to your wound.
And I think they had to dress in they were expected to dress in really drab colors like black and
yeah,
brown
no fancy ball gowns.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, and also that's practical because think of all the work that they're doing, and they're.
Yeah.
I remember reading about one nurse and the hem of her dress was soaking up the blood from the floor when she was working on some of these patients and when they first were coming in. So yeah, I imagine simple dress is practical as well.
I thought the saddest part was actually the death of the patient she called John.
Yes.
That really almost made me cry. It was really touching the way she wrote that.
And she's the one that had to tell him he was going to die.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, the doctor's like, oh yeah, you go tell him. And I mean, my gosh, that must have been heartbreaking for her. And I mean, here's a woman that she's fresh out of Concord. I don't think she was much traveled. And then she's stuck in this situation where you have to tell somebody he's dying. I mean,
yeah,
I can't even imagine. She's comes across a very strong-minded woman, and I think that's awesome. She and she talks about trying to work through the fact that she was sick, and then she finally gets confined to her quarters, and then is eventually has to be sent home. But and she wasn't there for very long either, which is really too bad. But,
it seemed like she enjoyed being the night nurse as well, because she had more chance to, I think, talk to the men and form more of a relationship, and got a little bit more into knowing what was going on.
That's true. Yeah, I agree. And I think, it was kind of quieter at night, less hectic than during the day when new patients were coming in and stuff. So I definitely see that.
Did anyone have any comments about the font the book was written in or printed in?
I have a copy of
Is it a bit small?
Was it tiny?
Yes.
Yeah. I have Louisa-May Alcott's Civil War, which is a compilation of all of her writings. Yeah, there's hospital sketches there, but and this has like a modern typeface in it. So I didn't have an issue, but Rachel, did you read the one?
I read the hospital sketches. It was very small. Yes. I had to have my reading glasses on.
Yeah, it looked like it was a reprint of a earlier edition.
Yeah, I just wondered if that was the type of font that they wrote in during the time that would have been written.
I think it is a copy of an original volume, yeah. And
Well, I was just going to say the book that I have is in regular print. It's not small at all.
Yeah, there's all kinds.
This particular copy.
Yeah, I've got the compilation of all of her Civil War writings, and so it's in there, and that's what I read. But yeah, I think it was common to use a small font for book printing because it's saved on paper.
I did notice that there was a version on Google that's what I was reading through.
You went electronic.
Yeah, so I could blow it up.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Smart
that's smart.
Yeah, I did.
That's smart.
Because I assume it's probably in the public domain, and that's why they could put it all online.
Yes, I think so. Does anybody else have any comments on this? Has anybody is this the first time reading it for folks, or are you surprised at Louisa-May Alcott being a nurse?
No, I wasn't surprised.
No.
I did know that, but this is the first time I read Hospital Sketches. What I found interesting is the way in her chapter titles, she really goes very quickly, but very in depth about what's happening. But she talks, her chapters are a day, a night, off duty, and then of course her postscript. So she really puts a lot into the structure of her, I think, the structure of her book. It's covers really so much of what she's doing, but she has it as a day, a night off, and that's how she goes through it.
Yeah, chronologically. Yeah. Yeah.
She was supposed to serve how long, and she just couldn't make it because of, I don't remember how long she was supposed to, she had like volunteered for, but of course she got sick.
Yeah, she was only there a couple of months. I'm not sure what the exact time frame was she was supposed to be there.
Wikipedia said she was there for 6 weeks.
Okay.
Okay,
Wow.
so a little over a month, and that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and she got the illness that she came down with was typhoid pneumonia. And that's because she talks about having a cough, a really bad cough. And then of course the most common way to treat just about every kind of illness was with mercury. So they're giving her, mercury. I don't know if they were giving her blue mass pills or calomel or what form of mercury they were using, but they were giving her the mercury, and we all know that what happens if you eat mercury, it's a poison. So she was getting worse, and then her father had to come down and take her home. But it's my understanding that she actually was invalided for a while because of the mercury in her system. So
yeah, she supposedly never really got over that in terms of her health, and she was a very strong person who she used to run every day back then when women didn't run. And yeah, the calomel, they say, had really affected her, and had she not had medicine, this cure, it can kill you.
Yeah, it's either going to cure you or kill you, I guess. One or the other. Yeah. So does anybody else have any comments? I wanted to point out that we had a couple of months back an excellent a woman who came into our museum and did an excellent presentation as a first person, Louisa-May Alcott. Her name's Jennifer Ockman, and she gave a really excellent presentation. Now, and if you weren't able to attend at our museum, we taped that, and it is available on our YouTube channel. And I see that Rachel is, if you put it into the
I think I did it right.
put it into the comments. I see that. Is that the link?
Yeah, I hope so. Let me see.
I don't see it as a link. I just see it as a title.
Okay, I'll get this figured out.
Okay. Well, Rachel will put the link to the video in the comments. if you want to go ahead and if you want to follow up on more of Louisa-May Alcott's story, Jennifer does a wonderful job.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Oops, sorry. I'm a complete amateur.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Yay. Okay.
Yes,
So,
I got it.
And it's about a 45-minute to an hour talk. And she did a really good job. She her dress, her manner, everything was really excellent. Just you think you're talking to Louisa. It was really, really well done. So yay for Jennifer Ackman.
You know, Tracy, at the museum one day, a lovely lady said, well, they didn't wear all those hoop skirts and fancy dresses, did they, when they were doing the nursing duties? And I thought, you know, I guess they did. I don't think I've ever seen a drawing or a photo where they weren't wearing those voluminous outfits. Do you know anything more about that?
I know that there were, I'm not really up on ladies' fashion. I don't, excuse me. I don't know if JR, maybe you can throw some light on women's fashion. JR Hartman is here. She's also a reenactor.
I know I have talked to some women reenactors that they have like a day dress, and so they have what's called a corded petticoat, which basically like gives a little bit more structure to the petticoat, but like it doesn't go out like a big house. And I know that there were some women that were wearing reform dresses at that time, which was basically like a cutoff dress where it like only goes down really to your knee, and then they had trousers underneath or like some kind of bloomers. And I know that I think Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, who was like a battlefield nurse, battlefield surgeon, she was wearing the reform dress.
Yeah, there's photographs of her with her Medal of Honor that she was awarded wearing the sort of like bloomers under the cutoff dress. Yeah, she was a big dress reformer indeed.
But I know that like a lot of the women were just really uncomfortable because they had to wear a dress that was like considered acceptable for women, and I would anticipate the nurses probably had to wear some kind of a dress, but it wouldn't have had like a ball gown hoop with a cage in it. Because those, I mean, that's, you just wouldn't even be able to get around the beds with something like that. And
What was the woman?
they had some more practical attire.
Yeah.
What was the woman's name that was a surgeon? I'm not familiar with her. I'd like to look.
Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. She was a surgeon during the Civil War. She was the only woman awarded the Medal of Honor.
Okay.
And she was really big on dress reform as well. And actually, the last book that we're going to be doing this year for our book club here is the story of Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, and we will be having the author come in to talk.
Oh, great! Looking forward to it.
Yeah. And speaking of people coming in to talk, I see our special guest, Hermina Glasshill, is now joined us. We're going to move on to the Reminiscences of My Life in Camp by Susie King Taylor, and I'm happy to welcome Hermina Glasshill. And she is an award-winning historian, Susie King Taylor scholar, and founder of the Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center. And she is joining us. I assume that you're coming from Georgia, joining us from Georgia. That's where she lives. And we're just so happy and pleased to have you.
Oh, well, I am really happy to be in community with you all today. I am actually 3 miles away from where Susie King Taylor was born and raised on the Isle of Wight here in Liberty County, Georgia.
Wow. Nice. Well, I think I know I was really enthralled by her work, and just it's so rare to have an African-American woman's perspective, and not to mention the fact that she was a nurse. And I was just really it was a really interesting book. I don't know if other folks want to make some comments, and then we can have Hermina tell us a little bit about herself and about Susie King and what she's doing to help promote her story.
I was tremendously impressed with her writing style, her incisiveness, her descriptions, and stunned. How was she taught early in life, since it was illegal for her to have received schooling at that point in time, that would have allowed her to flower into such an authoress?
Well, James, that's a really, really great question. And thank you so much for asking that question. So when it comes to her writing style and how she wrote with such vivid details about the war and her life in antebellum Georgia, perhaps we like to think that, you know, she might have been writing a diary during the war, but I don't think that she was writing a diary during the war. I mean, these are her recollections, as well as some things she might have, you know, jotted down because she was a literate human who had escaped slavery as a freedom seeker. And so Susie King, to answer your question, is that Susie King Taylor, enslaved by this Swiss gentleman by the name of Valentine Grest. He was married to this daughter of a German immigrant, and they had gotten married in Savannah. They had some lived experiences in Savannah before purchasing a small acreage of property that was majority swamp here in Liberty County. We're on the coast. It's mostly marsh. But her owner, over the course of his life in America, he had steadily acquired, initially through a headright grant in 1842, 46. He kept acquiring land through the headright grant. And then by the dawn of the Civil War, he has about 200 or 300 or more acres of property. But by the time he dies in 1872, he has 1,100 acres of property that he has been, the administrator of these women's estate, who were widows. But before the war, he's not profiting very much off of any kind of crops on his plantation, because it's in a swamp. JR has been here before. It's really swampy almost everywhere you go. And on this small isle in which she lives, it's even more swampier and marshy. And so what Valentine Grest, her slave owner, does is he utilizes what's called hiring out of his slaves into urban settings. And so he hires out her grandmother so that he could earn profit and be able to sustain himself and his plantation. And he hires them out in Savannah. For those of you who've ever, traveled to Savannah on Bay Street, that was where all of the port toings and froings happen. And her grandmother is hired out in that vicinity. Well, she doesn't go alone. She goes with her grandchildren, 3 of her grandchildren. And while she was there, this enslaved woman, she is demonstrating such agency because she knows these white families, these well-to-do white families in Savannah. And, let's be clear that they were Gullah Geechee people. They were speaking an Africanized, Creolized language of African and English and Native American words. So they're in the crux. Susie King Taylor, this young 7-year-old girl, she's in this milieu of movement in Savannah. On the Savannah port, and she's hearing all of these languages. There are people coming from Scotland and England, and white people who had been born in the Caribbean on these large rum plantations. So she's hearing all of these languages back and forth, but her grandmother is key. If you read the book, you hear how endearingly she speaks about her grandmother. She, especially when she died, she said, I love my grandmother. I was so happy that, she wrote me and asked me to come and see her. And I'm glad I got to see my grandmother before she passed away. Her love for her grandmother is just so deep and so strong. Her grandmother, prior to the war, had met these people as a washerwoman, going in and out of their homes, washing in her wash pot and ironing and doing all of that kind of domestic servitude work. But at the same time, she's doing what Gullah Geechee people call, she's playing fool and catching smart, meaning she's appealing to the sensibilities of these rich white people, some who are women who are kept women in their homes while their husbands are doing whatever those kind of landed gentry men do. And she's appealing to the heart of these women. Could you please teach my granddaughter how to read and write? And so you see that there are at least 4 instances of Susie King Taylor as a young Susanna, as a 7-year-old girl going to these secret bucket schools. First she goes to what is most familiar, free women of color, women who are the offspring of white men and enslaved women who have been given the privilege of education by extension of them being the children of these white men. And so they have the privilege of learning to read and write, but they still understand what W.E.B. Du Bois calls their two-ness of being a Negro and also being a slave. These women very well know that some of them could pass for white, but many of them were brown. And so if you were a free person, if you were a free person of color, you had to have a guardian on the streets when you were out in Savannah. You were just not footloose and fancy free doing whatever you wanted. You had to report annually to your guardian, who of course was typically a white male, who would have to know where you were, what you were doing. But these women understood very clearly what enslaved people encountered, and so they risked their own lives, violating themselves the slave laws that prohibited enslaved people from learning to read and write. And so these free women of color, she mentions them in her memoir. They are the ones who begin these secret bucket schools. Sometimes these schools were like in plain sight, because as she said, little kids were supposed to learn a task, whether it's, gathering coal, transporting wood, learning how to set tables. They entered these homes of free women of color under the guise that, yeah, they're a part of this urban slavery economic system, but the playing fool catching smart was they were, but in the bottom of those baskets in which they carried the accoutrements of domestic slavery were their books. And so and then her grandmother is even more bold here. There are records that show, Freedmen's Bureau records that show that she wasn't even 5 feet tall. I mean, here this woman is needling and threading in and out of homes every day, washing their clothes, and, all the while she's thinking. That's the agency that we have to overcome, that enslaved people had this. And so her grandmother takes it up a notch, because as you read, she says that the teacher said, not Mary Woodhouse, but Mary Beasley said, "I've taught you all I know, sugar. Your grandmama got to find somewhere else for you to go." Where else did they ever go? She's 7, 8, 9 years old. Clearly, she is a brilliant child. Clearly. As James mentioned, that speaks to her writing, because this is where she gained her education. So when her grandmother ups her game and goes to white women and schmoos them and says, however she negotiated these terms when their husbands were not home, they were sympathetic to her cause. And so she talks about the 2 young white kids that taught her. So what I've done as I'm writing this new, never before told book, a biography of Susie King Taylor's life. So these 2 white kids, they aren't just any white kids. They are the kids of the elite of the elite. I've looked at the schools that they attended. The young girl attended a convent. The young man attended one of the academies here in Savannah. I'm actually 45 miles south of Savannah, but he attended the academy. So I went back and looked at the curriculum in the antebellum period. They were learning we call it social studies, but world history and literature and all of that. And can you imagine that a 7, 8, 9-year-old enslaved girl is just absorbing all of this? She is absorbing this. So it's very clear that, to me at least, that when she is there in Savannah, working as a hired out enslaved child with her enslaved grandmother, who is a washerwoman, that she is acquiring this education in stealth, to the point that she like she says, when she's with the young girl, I can't think of her name, but anyway, the young white girl, she got sent to a convent, but she's learning a lot. Then she goes to the white boy. His name is James, and he's in high school. She's learning everything. Her grandmother has even schmoozed him, and his pedigree was like really, really elite and wealthy. And some kind of way, he becomes her teacher. And if you'll notice, later on in life, she meets him again in Washington, D.C., because he actually switched sides. He kicked the Confederates to the curb, and he becomes a Union soldier. And many years later, they run into each other in Washington, D.C. So to make, I went all out, James, because I get excited about this. But as you can see, that's how she is able to write this really clear, rich, detailed book that's only 82 pages. She stuffs all of those details into 82 pages for many reasons. But it is clear that she was a brilliant young enslaved girl, who becomes a freedom seeker, and she uses all of this rather providentially. When the war takes place, it's what is needed, because one of the commodores on the USS Potomska asks, is there anybody here who can read? Clearly, she has everything that it takes to be what I like to call Georgia's first federally funded teacher. Under the Army, she is a teacher. She becomes sanctioned as a teacher. So I think that, you know, that's where I am like really giving credit where credit is due. And I just was looking at this Forgotten Angels photograph that Restelli guy likes to say is Susie King Taylor. Let me tell y'all something. All Black people don't look alike. And this is not, you can't see it, but I don't know, but that is not Susie King Taylor in the front of that Forgotten Angels book. But anyway, that's the answer to your question, James.
All right. I love it.
I love in her book where like she's talking about all of these things that are going on, and like she talks about how they're having, you know, a party because they realize that like the Emancipation Proclamation, and you like hear all of these contemporaneous events, but like how they were actually experiencing it in their real lives and like learning this news, and it makes it like it's clear that like people were communicating and like, you know, she had to have been like very plugged in to what was going on in the news, and like this information is all going around. And I really love how she talks about, but then there's like all these little mundane details about like what they're eating and like getting on the cart and going these places.
And the little pig that
The little pig, right?
You know.
Oh, the pet pig. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was great. That was great.
But you know, the one thing at the beginning of the book is the two endorsements, the letters from Lieutenant Colonel Trowbridge and Higginson, which Trowbridge is so sympathetic to her story that as a nurse that she didn't get the benefit of the Nurse Pension Act. She didn't get that. And I think that that's the beginning of where she says, you know, I'm going to show these people. She's worked with the Women's Relief Corps. She's worked to pass that nurse pension law, and here she is. She cannot be a beneficiary of the work that she's been so desperately advocating along with white women. And so that's the sad part of it, but I'm so happy that it takes a white guy writing something down, that Trowbridge says it's sad that you didn't get that. Or that would have been, that little bit of information would have been really lost in history. And the fact that one of her former commanding officers, endorses her book with that letter and makes it clear that, she was as good a nurse as anyone else.
Right. And I think it's interesting that it's a sign of the times that she had to have some sort of endorsement from a white person in order to get this book published in the first place.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is those letters are endorsements, but she paid for everything.
Wow.
She self-published it. She wrote it, self-published it. You can look at the front pages of it. But she paid for everything, and she probably did not make a lot of money off of it, but I did have the pleasure of going to Duke University and actually beholding what I consider her book to be as my Bible. I actually held a book and I was like, oh my God, that Susie King Taylor wrote and self-published this book. So
That's very cool. That's very cool. Other folks have any comments on this?
Well, her thoughts on present conditions, one of the 13th chapter, I think it was, I mean, that really just blew me away. She could have written that yesterday.
I was like, that sounds like today.
I know. It does. It was really, I thought, she was right there.
Great.
Anybody else have any comments?
I liked her story about when they decided to walk and it turned out it was too far to walk, and the whole story of getting there and getting back was really cool. She wrote it very well.
Mm-hmm. And I like the part where she gets shipwrecked, the castaway chapter. I'm like, oh my God, all of this stuff that this poor woman has gone through. And in addition to that, she also gets shipwrecked. I'm like, really?
Right. And 3 times on a shipwreck or whatever. A boat.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Right. Almost drowns, you know?
Yep.
And she says, you know,
she's not going to die by water.
Yeah, that she says that, you know, it's she's really saying that God has a sense of humor, that she certainly will not die by drowning.
She'll never have a watery
biblical
grave.
reference. Yeah.
Miss Romina, how did you decide to study and get involved with Susie King Taylor's story?
Ooh, Cindy, that's a great question. I was the associate director of the Civil War Center, of the Center for the Study of the Civil War Era at Kennesaw State University at the beginning of, 2 years before the sesquicentennial. And my dean at the time was a Canadian guy, just brilliant. He was dean of the College of Social Sciences. And upon being hired in 2008, we had this conversation, just a real deep conversation about, you know, what is it that, you know, I'm in the South, I'm from Atlanta, you know, I know the narratives that of the lost cause that just will not be lost. And so what are your expectations? Because I know what I want to do in this role. And he gave me carte blanche to, there was an annual symposium and he gave me carte blanche to come up with a theme. And so my theme was alternative Southern realities, African Americans and the Civil War. And so as I began to do more research on the United States Colored Troops, 1st South Carolina Volunteers, 33rd USCT, and I stumbled upon her name and I thought I had discovered gold. So that was in 2008, 2009. So as we, you know, were advancing further into the actual sesquicentennial, I decided that I wanted to make her, you know, as a public historian, I really wanted to take her work on the road. I'm from Georgia. She's from Georgia. Nobody had heard of her. So I like to say that she is Georgia's Harriet Tubman. She wanted to free more people. If they wanted to learn to read and write, she would have freed more. And so that's how I became enchanted by her story. And so I resigned in 2011 during the sesquicentennial, because I felt so deeply and so strongly that her story was one that should be told, must be told. And so my husband and I, we live in her hometown because as a part of my really lecture tour of Susie King Taylor across the country, from Chicago to California, New York, Rochester, and other places, I called somebody who I had met like 15 years ago that I knew lived in here, and I didn't know if the man was still dead or alive. But I called him and I said, "Hey, do you know that you have like a freedom seeker, an escaped slave who's from this town?" And he was like, "I just learned about her yesterday." And I was like, "Hey, I'd like to come down there and share what I've been researching for the last 10 years about her life." And he invites me. My husband and I, you know, this is a really small town. There are only 2 high schools in the whole county. But I had to speak at the 2 high schools and the Center of African American Life since 1872, the Freedmen's Bureau School. It's a American Missionary Association school that was rebuilt in the 1930s. And every Black person in the county, and for that matter, it was a whole bunch of white people too, came out to hear that lecture that night. And I was just astounded that somebody wanted to hear her story. So the next day, my husband and I, we were at a hotel. The next day we check out. I actually go into the Isle of Wight, where she was born. And I have this religious epiphany that the Holy Spirit has inspired me to move here. And my husband was like, you have bumped your head. This town doesn't have a Walmart. There are only 2,700 people here. We don't have a grocery store. Our main street is like maybe 2,500 feet. It's like really small. And so, you know, I was praying that he agreed. He is a truck driver who was actually, while we were in Atlanta, we're both from Atlanta. He was a truck driver who for, 5 years or so was already driving to the coast for loads at the port. And he was so supportive that he asked the company that he was working with, the logistics company, if we moved to the coast, if he could reverse his trip and take a load from Savannah to Atlanta every day. And they said yes. And that's how I got here. I moved here. And so
That's
I
awesome.
go to Susie King Taylor's birth homestead quite often. We have the Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center. JR's been to the museum, which is the only museum dedicated to Susie King Taylor in the country. And
JR's got the bag. Susie King Taylor.
I
All
love
right.
you. Yes.
This is the best tote bag ever. You should all go visit the museum and get a tote bag.
I love it. Oh, that's how Cindy, that's how I got into this wonderful work.
It's a phenomenal story. And I think it's events that happen to you that really spur us on to do important things in our lives. And I think that's what happened to you.
Yes, absolutely.
That's great. And yeah, if does the museum have a website or something that we can, relate to our viewers here?
It's the Susie King Taylor Institute.org. So there might be a link to some museum photos there. But we're working on like a GoPro, because I do tours, Escape to Freedom tours. During COVID, it was during like car caravan. So with Zoom, I gave people the dial-in number for Zoom, and they would trail behind me because I ain't want to get no COVID. So they drove. For Juneteenth last year, there were like 20 cars that we drove, and they followed me to the aisle and around the county. And that's what we do. That's part of the tour is driving to her the place where she was born.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh.
I want to know, when are you going to record the audiobook of her story? Or
I'm working on it now.
Oh, yay.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm working on it now.
Because you have just such a vibrant way of speaking. And when when you were quoting the book, it was like being there. And I am so excited to hear you read it.
Thank you.
That would be great.
When you do have that done, let us know. I'm the store manager, and we will sell it in our gift shop. So
that would
Absolutely.
be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned doing lecture tours and such, and if you ever want to get to Maryland, I mean, we'd love to have you give a lecture at our museum.
That
would be
love
wonderful.
that. I would love
That would be wonderful. Let's keep in touch, and maybe we can work something out, because that would be really cool to get you up to our museum.
Sure, I would love that. And this is I don't know if you all could see this, but this is Susie.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is
Oh, that's awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
So thanks, JR, for inviting me and tagging me on Facebook.
And thanks, JR, for it's all JR Hardman, and she's the one that told me about Hermina and got me in touch with her. And so thank you, JR, for that. And JR's got her own project. She's working on a film called Reenactress about women in reenacting. So you can check that out too. She's currently working on that.
I was really excited to learn about this story because I was looking for stories of Black women in the military from that time, and there were very few. And this is also one of the few autobiographies of a woman who was doing military work. And like it's very rare for somebody to have been traveling with the unit. And there's the times where she describes like loading rifles and like learning to, and you're like, she was in it, like she was right there.
She was embedded there. So I like to say, you know, she was not, let's just dispel and dismantle the myth. She was not the first Black nurse. I know people like to say that, and it sounds good, but it's not true. I mean, as a historian, I can't be walking around telling lies. But at any rate, so I like to describe her as a freedom seeker who was a teacher, a nurse, a musket cleaner, a laundress, and a cook. She did it all. And in fact, when she really talks about her heart was with nursing, because here's the deal with that. So when she talks about nursing, you know, she said when she had to go out on the battlefield, this is where her real work begins, because she comes from a long line of healers. She comes from enslaved women who knew how to gather herbs and who knew how to gather roots to make these teas. That's how she knows about sassafras tea. She knows that because this generation of women, her mother, and here is what resonated with me and why I just became enamored with her story is that I know 5 generations of my family, my maternal line. And here she starts off her book with her 5 generations of her maternal line. And in that exchange between the generations, you get so much. She talks about somebody being a midwife. She had to have learned these medicinal practices through these women. How else would a 13-year-old girl be on the battlefield and know that you need to drink sassafras tea to cure smallpox, which, by the way, probably didn't work, but nevertheless.
It's worth a shot.
It's better than the mercury, though, right?
It is better than the mercury,
yes.
Right. So
maybe it's some of the homespun remedies, like at least they're not going to kill you and they're gonna like hydrate you, which is something you need. And I like to think like some of this stuff that was, you know, centuries tested, like they knew it wasn't going to make you worse. So
right.
if you were not being subjected to like bloodletting and mercury poisoning, like you're doing a lot better.
Right, absolutely.
Well, we're almost out of time, and I just want to say thank you so much, Hermina, for joining us and really animating this conversation on Susie King Taylor, and I'm just thrilled to have had you, and thanks also to JR for hooking us up. I think that's great, and we would love to get you to the museum at some point, and I'll be in touch with you on that.
Sounds great.
Next book is that we're going to be reading. It's a big one, folks, so I suggest you get started. It's Stephen B. Oates' A Woman of Valor, about Clara Barton. And it's pretty thick. We're giving you a couple months to read through it, so hopefully it won't be too daunting. And then we'll get together in a couple months and discuss Clara's life. Anybody else have any comments before we leave? Rachel, do you have anything to add?
I do want to kind of plug our gift shop. So with all books are on sale online. If I can do it really quick, I'll put the link in the chat really quick.
Yeah, if you need a copy of
any of the books. Yeah.
of any of the books that we talked about. And yeah, they're all available through our bookstore. civilwarmed.org is our website. And then Rachel, I think you can just click on shop up at the top. Something like that.
Okay, I did something really wrong.
Uh-oh.
I'm not very good at this. Okay, I'll get it.
Okay, all
Just
right.
a second, I'll have it.
You'll have it. Okay.
I promise.
Just found it. I put it in.
Guess what? JR found it. She's
awesome. You are awesome. Okay.
She's the techie person.
Now on, JR.
That's why she works with all this stuff. So
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Before we depart, I'd like to say, I'm really curious. Susie King Taylor mentions Clara Barton in her book.
Yes, I noticed that. Yeah.
And I wonder if Clara Barton even remembered Susie King Taylor at Union Hospital number 10 in Beaufort, South Carolina. That's very interesting because as a very young girl, she made a profound impression on Susie King Taylor.
Right, and I did mark that passage in Susie King Taylor's book. I was like, oh my God, she met Clara Barton. Well, it'll be interesting to see if in this book about Clara if Susie King Taylor's mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Have to start reading. All right. Well, thank you all so very much for tuning in, and
thank you, everybody.
We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple months for our next Between the Lines book club.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.